welcome everyone to day 3 of IMSH 2022 here in downtown Los Angeles at the Convention Center. So excited to be supporting the PRESSBOX here. My name's Lance, I'm the founder and CEO of HealthySimulation.com. We're in partnership today and all week with the Society for Simulation in Healthcare, which is hosting IMSH, or the International Meeting for Simulation in Healthcare, for conversations that kind of talk about the industry, what's happening here at the event, maybe for those of you at home who could not join us here in Los Angeles, or those that are off doing other exciting things at the event. So trying to capture some of the magic that's happening here and sharing it with you all at home. So really excited today to have on our XR panel, which is going to be talking about ways that new digital and remote distance learning technologies have really come about in the past 2 years because of the global pandemic, and what that has really meant for not only the society, but for the various companies and also the industry and the community at large, right? So with us, starting from my right and moving on, we have David Lasman, who's the CEO of GigXR. He's also the host of the Explore XR podcast, an amazing discussion opportunity there. Chris Ingwalson, who's the Chief Revenue Officer at Health Scholars Technologies. And then we've got Bob Armstrong, who's the past president of the Society for SSH, or Society for Simulation in Healthcare, and currently also the Executive Director of Eastern Virginia Medical School's Sentar Center for Simulation and Immersive Learning. So welcome all, thank you for joining us here today for our discussion. So we did a presentation on Sunday about the survey that we had provided to the HealthySimulation.com global community, asking them to kind of update us about their utilizations and the impacts of COVID on their programs, right? And of course, we had campus closures and we had clinical rotation shutdowns, and this caused a lot of stress for educators out there or for clinical programs that professionals were trying to perform training on a regular basis. And what that survey suggested to us was that a lot of investment has been made in these types of XR technologies, and that includes, of course, screen-based virtual patients, augmented reality such as the HoloLens. We also have virtual reality where you're in a fully immersive space, and mixed reality technologies that enable for like 360 cameras, distance-based learning, Zoom applications, any way that we could try to get through this crazy pandemic time to overcome some of these challenges. Groups reported that not only did that bring more awareness and support from other clinical educators about what the simulation program could do, but also C-suite executives, deans, leadership of institutions, so certainly has made an impact there. So much so that all those groups are planning to continue to invest in those technologies, consider them an important part of investment moving forward. So that all being said, I'm really excited to hear about the perspectives from each one of our panelists here about their the expansion of XR technologies into the clinical simulation space. Obviously those things were existing before the pandemic, but were really needed and important, in my opinion, during the pandemic to help overcome them. So David, tell us a little bit about GigXR and what it has seen over the past 2 years.
So yeah, ours is quite an interesting story actually. We kicked off our business at the beginning of 2020, and
wow, good timing, man.
Great timing. And our platform is a mixed reality platform for the distribution of holographic content for healthcare learning.
Sure.
And it was predicated on students being in the same place at the same time, interacting with content using a mixed reality headset like the Microsoft HoloLens.
Sure.
And no sooner had our products hit the market than the pandemic hit. And our customer base overnight went away.
Oh.
But in that moment we saw an opportunity because we're a platform, we were able to engineer relatively quickly a remote layer that allowed our customers, and more importantly our students, many of whom were distributed across the country, to join an instructor-led lesson and viewing holographic content using their mobile devices as a conduit onto that content. So effectively,
so they were at home using their phones while the instructor, maybe over Zoom or in the tool itself, were helping them to understand what they were looking at.
That's entirely right.
Just using their phone, so they didn't even have to have the hardware.
They didn't even have to have the hardware.
Incredible.
And the way to think about that is that the content is not on the device itself. It's,
right.
It's effectively broadcast into the space that they happen to be in.
It's in the cloud.
And they can get up and walk around that content. And in one of our applications, HoloPatient, which is a standardized patient learning application, this was incredibly powerful because a lot of student nurses, for instance, require a certain amount of sim hours in order to qualify. And because they weren't on campus, they weren't getting that experience.
Yeah.
And so through extended reality and through systems like ours, we were bringing that simulation to them.
Right.
And I think in a post-COVID world, I think that will persist. We'll see campuses relying less on the bricks and mortar of a sim center and say, hey, we can bring the simulation to wherever the students happen to be.
Right.
And that's quite a powerful new paradigm.
Yeah, increased access, right? If we've got this learning pyramid that I always talk about with high fidelity simulation at the top, we're adding a whole new layer of digital transformation that enables for democratization of access, standardized training across the board, and more content that can be 24/7 based on whatever's the most convenient for the learner to engage. But I think you've made an important point. A lot of companies, a lot of institutions obviously had to make major pivots. Entire governments, the society, a lot of groups had to find ways to move around or solve the challenges of COVID. And so it's great to hear that the company was able to find ways to use these technologies in new ways. And I think that comes when in film school, we first learn about creating a framework, and then from there, you can't do anything outside that framework. So you can't go over here and you can't go over there. Well, the same thing was caused to us by the pandemic, and that means we had to find solutions within this box, and that adds to creativity and actually, I think, drives innovation overall, because now we have to focus in this area and find and pull solutions out. Chris, talk to us a little bit about Health Scholars and what it's seen and experienced from the company's perspective over the past 2 years.
Yep. So a little bit of a similar story. We really started in 2019. So a little bit more time, and then the pandemic hit. But we're very focused on, protocol-driven training for high-risk scenarios, and it was very much to solve a scaling issue, even before the pandemic started. And really, what we've seen over the last couple of years is we've seen a shift within, especially the hospital space, is that they are having to get more creative in how they fill gaps around the continuum of education. So from your initial nurse onboarding to figuring out how to upskill, reskill, and now I think even more recently, the cross-training of nurses, right? So how can you quickly take someone and potentially give them the simulation experience that they need quickly to get them to move into another department to cover the surges within COVID.
Just-in-time training.
Exactly.
Awesome.
And so we've really seen an interest in being able to leverage virtual reality for that. Give them the same simulation experience-based learning, but do it in a way that's easier to scale, and very much to your point, David, of being able to bring the simulation to them versus them having to go out and get the training somewhere else, or do it on a day off, or interrupt shifts that are already pretty tough right now.
Absolutely. And so, Bob, you and I have had a chance to hang out online through XR Technologies over the past year a couple of times with Taylor Freeman, who's the CEO of Axon Park, and he's been helping to bring together some thought leadership in the space to talk about and experience, what's happening in the XR. So great to see you in person, but I know you and I have been playing avatars with each other and throwing rockets at each other in various XR spaces. But I'd love to know what's going on with the Simulation Center, and also, from your perspective, the society, what's going on there. But let's start with your center in terms of XR Technologies.
Right, so thanks, and I was always happy to be here, and it is good to see you in person, Lance. So our center adapted to COVID by essentially flipping our business model on its head. And for those of you that don't know, I mean, we provide service to the School of Medicine, School of Health Professions, but we have about 90 external clients that we provide services to. So we generate revenue through those services. All that external revenue activity pretty much went away.
Wow.
Because everybody was just trying to figure out what was okay to do.
Right.
And we were ill-prepared, like I think almost every simulation center, to shift into a virtual mode. I mean, we didn't have the right kind of virtual video teleconference capability. We didn't have an understanding of how we were going to execute in that space. So we spent the first 2 months just figuring out how we were going to conduct business. And it was really just about how do we meet the bare minimum required to get to the end of the semester. So, and that's just a very pragmatic approach to this, right?
What can we do now?
Yeah.
Which obviously you got to just put one foot in front of the other when you have chaos around you.
You bet. And so we were, it was a whole lot of, and I think from my discussions with every other simulation center executive director or director, everybody was facing the exact same thing. We're just trying to get to the end of the day right now, you know?
Yeah.
And without having a stroke. So in the ensuing time, we've figured out how to go, how to have a mix of both in-person and virtual, but all of our virtual right now is still a face-to-face experience over a platform like Zoom, okay?
Sure.
And if we're not doing it in person. And part of that's okay, because 75% of what we do is standardized patient-based in our simulation center, and the 25% that's not is really supportive of the residency program, so they're okay being in whatever position they need to be in anyway. So we've done an awful lot of in-person there. Now, so I say all that, we still have an extreme interest in getting into the virtual realm, and it's just literally finding the bandwidth to rebuild what we needed in those environment and in those tools.
Right.
It's been something it's a luxury that unfortunately we just haven't been able to muster it. You know, and it only goes up and down, right? We had the Delta problem and we had people get sick. Now we got the Omicron problem, we got people sick. So we're doing a lot of water tread. That's at my center, okay? And that's a similar, there's a lot of centers have a similar story. This one is mine. As far as the society goes, you know, we understand and appreciate the fact that there are these new technologies and additional modalities for learning that are out there that we have got, that we want to support.
Sure.
I can assure you that the society is more than 100% behind the promotion of this, and then learning about what standards of best practice that we can develop in total, right? No one person doesn't develop a standards of best practice. We all do, right?
Sure.
But we come together and we agree on it.
Right.
And there are, I can see a lot of those efforts down the pike to where we're gonna be able to say, hey, here's the right way to use this.
Right.
And it's necessary, because if we're going to accredit a center that's using a lot of this, we need to understand if they're using it correctly to some small s standard that makes sense.
Right. And so, you know, we talked yesterday on the panel for the PRESSBOX discussing certification, and so the CHSE for simulation educators and the SOS for simulation operations specialists. And you know, I think more and more so, these XR technologies are going to come into the space, and so those that are certified are going to need to be ensured that, you know, that is going to include more XR-based technologies, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I'm excited to know that that is definitely on the radar, and it's something that's coming, because there's no way this cat's going back in the box. Yesterday, you know, we had Amar Patel from CA Healthcare and Lynn Welsh from Education Management Solutions, and both of them said from their perspective, hybrid is here to stay, right? They both have various tools that are outside of that scope, and so knowing that is a part of what the ecosystem is going to look like permanently from here on, I think is important to then recognize and reflect in both accreditation and certification for those, you know, professionals in the space. So let me ask you about this. You know, I'd love to know from each of you about challenges the greatest barriers that your clients had, or your, you know, your cohorts had there at the Sim Center with regards to kind of this transformation. Where were the challenges, the greatest barriers for kind of moving into this quickly and rapidly over the past 2 years? Where did they find the biggest headaches, you know what I mean, in terms of frustrations?
Yep.
So if I may, so early days for us, when we were working exclusively with the Microsoft HoloLens, so you needed, you know, in the Sim Center, at least 5 to 10 of these devices to get the most out of our system.
Right.
That's a significant investment. Yeah. And asking institutions to make that investment up front before they've been able to have the value of the proposition demonstrated.
The buyer has no imagination.
Yeah,
right.
it was challenging. Now that challenge kind of dissipated when we introduced the remote layer. So, you know, COVID brought a benefit. For us, though, it being a nascent technology, you have to sell that, don't you? And the longer we go on, the longer we're into this journey, and I'm seeing this evidenced this week here at IMSH, people are finding us now because they're saying, we've heard about you, we've heard from our peers about the value that this type of experience delivers in our training. And by the way, I think in the post-COVID world, even when we're back on campus, I think you're right, the genie's out of the bottle. This technology is here to stay, but it's going to work very well in a very complementary fashion with existing simulation systems. You know, last week we announced a partnership that we have with Northwest Permanente, where we're developing tools that overlay holographic content onto existing mannequins. As we know, most mannequins present as a 30-year-old Caucasian male, which is great until you need to know what it would be like to work on an elderly African-American female who has a high obesity. We can do that now in simulation with extended reality. So I think the barriers that we saw in the early days are tending to slip away as people see the value of this type of technology.
Right. And there still is going to be, the technology adoption curve, and we have early adopters over here and our laggards. The laggards aren't going to do anything until they're forced to. Regulated, mandated, required, forced to do these types of things. But what COVID did was it kind of, shrank that down down to innovators and early adopters. Right? We had no alternative. We had to find solutions, and so that pain of being discomforted by a new technology. Well, you got to get over it because guess what? There's no other alternative. We have to do something. And so once that's ripped off, and all of a sudden you start to see a standardization of process. You see access to content. All of those things really start to add up to ROI. And actually, it's not that complicated. It's not that hard to use. Right at the end of the day. So Chris, tell us a little bit about some of the challenges your clients saw with kind of upgrading to these types of virtual reality technologies. And of course, afterwards, we're going to talk about successes too. So let's talk about challenges first, though.
So I think the biggest challenge we've seen is folks understand the benefit and they're excited about the technology, but they don't understand how to integrate it into their existing programs and curriculums. Right? They don't understand, well, is this a pre-learning tool? Is this an assessment tool? Is this to replace the simulation, right?
Sure.
And the answer is it can be all of the above.
Right.
But it's really helping to consult and understand ultimately what is their goal, what are you trying to achieve,
right.
And then really helping everyone to understand where can an XR technology fit within your existing programs and curriculums.
Right.
And that's just been the number one, and I think the more that we can help roadmap what this looks like and what's kind of the easy pathway where things integrate best, then we'll be making it easier for everyone to adopt
And I think that speaks to a more prominent issue within clinical simulation anyway, where it's just like, oh, look, a shiny toy, let's buy that, and then let's see what it does. No. We need to figure out what our needs are and then apply the appropriate tool, right? And then, of course, I think opportunities like IMSH, the healthysimulation.com Learn platform provide for a way for people to share about how they have utilized these tools in an effective way, and that's something that then it's easier to understand because here's a peer, they have a similar sized program to us and they're doing similar types of things. Oh wow, okay, I see. They augmented this and they complemented that. So I think sharing is going to be a big part once we kind of get the foothold in the door from initial users to that expanded base. It's about sharing those types of stories, and hopefully we're helping to do that here today. Bob, tell us a little bit about maybe some of the challenges you guys faced with kind of these new technologies.
Yeah, so you hit the nail on the head. There's no lack of appetite for wanting to use these tools and this technology.
Sure.
But it is, when you're in the middle of a semester, and quite frankly, our pace is we're 12 months a year, right?
Right.
So when you need to make a change, there's no pause. You don't get to hit pause and go figure out how you're going to do it. And so any change you make is akin to changing a tire on a moving vehicle. You have to be very, very careful how you do it. It's doable, but it's very, very, you got to be very careful. You're going to lose an arm. So that's been the struggle, and it's been exacerbated by the pace of operations because COVID and the additional concerns there. That said, we've got a few devices, right? I've got a couple of Oculus and an HTC Vive, and we're experimenting with them. We're trying to figure out how we're going to use them. It's unfortunately not the people who typically develop the content because they're busy developing content that we need to use every day. So I think there will come a time where we're going to have to. My challenge is to figure out how I need to reorganize our energy so that we can do both. Right? Because this is an inevitability, and it's a necessity. I was thinking a lot about this. So much of what we are challenged with is the content piece, but the access to the content. And everybody wants the content to be accessible everywhere in some sort of valuable form, right? And so the Sim Center is a tremendous asset, but we're only there 10 hours a day, 12 hours a day. We need to take those types of engagements and make them available to somebody at 10 o'clock on a Sunday morning if that's what they want to do.
Right.
without me having to come in and turn all the lights on.
And that is often a problem, right? Is you have your night shift staff doesn't always necessarily get the same access to sim and the training just by what time they work.
Yeah. One of the survey respondents said that one of the challenges that they had was that not all the learner computers were equal. They weren't the same. And so because of that, some of them had an easier time with gaining access, even for web-based solutions, because if your computer is old enough, it might just be on its last legs anyway. And so, the hope is that perhaps some of these infrastructure bills will help to provide for more access in rural areas that are somewhat limited compared to urban areas, right? So, speaking about just kind of the willingness and the readiness, I think learners are too. I did a quick statistic that's going to age us all a little bit in that 2007 was the first iPhone came out, and anyone born in that year is 16 years old at this point, right? So they're coming to clinical education in the next 2 to 4 years. They're going to start their educational degree pathways, and they're going to be digital natives. They've grown up with iPads in their hands and iPhones in their hands, and they know how to operate those things. And they're going to be like, what do you mean I can't turn on and off the simulator from my phone, right? It just doesn't make sense. They want everything everywhere. And so I think we really do have to be prepared for that as we move forward. If institutions have not started to look at XR technologies, now is the time. Now is absolutely the time to start to think about these things, because that tidal wave is coming and it's going to be massive. And it's going to be not only an advantage in terms of consideration of which program should I go to, but the outcomes that are going to be associated with your program long term. You're going to start to see more ROI, which means more access and more clinical improvement and training outcomes over time. So let's talk about successes. Yeah, any success stories from your clients that you've seen over the past 2 years? They've been able to utilize XR technologies, overcome challenges, and make a win for themselves?
Absolutely. First of all, I think it's important to stress that what we do with our systems is we don't try and go into institutions and say, we want you to change your curriculum. We say we want to help you with some of the most complex parts of your curriculum and give you tools to make it easier to teach those things. And so what we've seen among some of particularly our early adopters, is they're beginning to write white papers, they're beginning to research, and they're beginning to understand the outcomes of the technologies like ours. And we're seeing things like knowledge retention increasing exponentially.
Wow.
We're seeing the speed of learning, some of the most complex parts of medical training, increasing rapidly. And what we're hearing empirically now is that is seeping its way through to clinical experience. One of our customers down in New Zealand, a fantastic institute called Otago University, one of their practitioners came up with a great line, which was the Holo Patient, which is a standardized patient application that brings standardized patients holographically into the classroom. Because of its hyperrealism, it's allowing our students, she said, to start to think like a nurse before they actually become nurses.
Right, professional identity.
And she's written a paper on that, and that's fantastic. The other thing that I think that points to a tremendous success on for us is that some of the biggest institutions and most respected institutions in the world are coming to us and saying, hey, we are supporters of XR, we want to partner with you to build the tools of tomorrow. We're talking about Cambridge University hospitals in the United Kingdom, Michigan Medicine out here in North America.
So that success is leading towards more success. It's snowballing, and I think that's what we're going to continue to see.
It's snowballing, and I'm seeing that evidenced here in the last couple of days on the floor. These institutions that maybe a year ago were a little bit reticent at saying, not only do we need to embrace this, but we need to be proactive in the way that we approach. We need to continue
to help support and develop it. Chris, success stories from you?
Yeah,
from health scholars?
This is my favorite part to always talk about, because this is why I do what I do, right?
Yeah.
So I think we've got 2 great stories recently. One was at a hospital out west, St. Charles Health System. So they were using our OR training to help augment theirs. And the nurse who was leading the program tells the story of, well, we did the fire in the OR training, and then next day I went to go do rounds, and I saw on every single nurse's prep that they had added saline to the prep table. And that's exactly what we're teaching in the program.
Wow.
And she was
it's instant.
Yeah, so she was like, instead of me taking the time of doing my traditional simulation where I kind of fake the fire and I go through all that, I was able to take everybody, through the VR program and see it the next day in action. They modified their behavior, and are modifying a behavior that ultimately will save someone's life or prevent,
I mean, just the
an
cost
awful
savings
experience.
alone from a single adverse event compared to the minimal ounce of prevention, pound of cure here.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, and then we've been working with a large health system, and we just finished a pilot in Colorado where we're located. So we had 200 learners go through a 6-month program. They were using multiple VR simulations within our library. But the whole idea was to test their competency scores, right? And to see, did those improve over time when they did repeatable training? So the 200 learners did multiple sessions over a 6-month period, and we saw a 35% increase in their competency scores.
35% increase. Incredible.
And again, this isn't necessarily to replace the traditional simulation.
No.
But to your point, we're training on high-risk scenarios, and it's hard to do the physical simulations for a lot of these, and it's certainly hard to do it repeatably, right? Within a short duration.
Cost of scheduling and having run a sim center, of scheduling and planning and prepping and training, and then bringing the learners in and the setup and the teardown, we need to continue to do that. Professional healthcare is a hands-on skill, right? Communication, direct involvement, skill-based, intubation, whatever it is, we have to be there. But we can augment that and complement that with 24/7 access to the learning. Order of operations, what are the tools? What's the saline bag for, and why do we need that here in this situation? So it's just fantastic to hear that those types of numbers are coming out with such short utilization, massive increases. Bob, we just got another short amount of time left here, but any success stories from you guys from
two
using
real
XR?
quick ones. So at EVMS, I was able to help facilitate the first completely virtual reality continuing medical education course. That's a persistent course, not a one-time course, a persistent VR course. We did this with Taylor Freeman at Axon Park, and that's available for anybody in all 50 states. So that was nice that we were able to get that done. From a society standpoint, we've energized efforts around the support to telesimulation at a national level.
Been huge.
And that's a whole nother discussion, but the point is that we've energized this discussion at the society level, are putting the resources towards making something like this happen at a national programmatic level.
Right. And
so I see the next 24 months are going to be really vital to that activity, but it's a telesimulation based, which is an XR based solution.
Absolutely, yeah. So, I think unfortunately we had to go through a global pandemic, but it has shown us the opportunities of using XR in such amazing ways, and I'm really excited to see how we can leverage all of that to continue this snowball effect across the entire industry around the world. So thank you to our panelists for joining us here, and we'll see you all at the next one. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.